Now let's get random with randomly Ronnie Jr.
And we're going to go more into Housewives in a little bit because I want to know your thoughts on like a great Larsa Pippen. I want to know your thoughts on a wonderful Melissa Gorga, as we're talking about. Some of the ones I really, Luann, the delusion that is Luann in the best possible way. So we'll do a Bravo moment in a second. But as what you're saying, I think what you were saying even about Teresa is like, it can't be one note, you know? And
No.
so when we think about pivoting, when we think about career direction, this is something for everybody, but specifically if you have a brand, right? So what is it that you always took from Joan Rivers and that constant career reinvention? Because you're older than me, you of course, like I love Joan Rivers, but I feel like you have more years on me of like consuming her work. What is it about Joan Rivers that kind of just A, we miss her so much, but B, how did she have the tenacity to keep going? What do you think that is?
Well, number one, if Joan was alive today, she would hate what's happened to the world of comedy, where you
Mm,
have to be so PC and you can't say this.
mm,
She would absolutely hate it, and
yeah.
rightfully so, because it's comedy. The second thing, what was so brilliant about Joan was she would look at her calendar, and if she wasn't booked 3 months in advance, she'd be like, okay, time to pivot, time to reinvent. You know
Mhm,
what? Maybe the 20 to 30-year-olds don't know who I am, but the 40s, 50, and 60-year-olds do. I'm going to do Celebrity Apprentice and introduce myself to a whole new audience.
mhm.
I'm going to sit on the sidelines and eat red carpet, and I'm going to trash people and what they're wearing. And once again, with my daughter, introduced to a whole new audience.
Mhm.
She was brilliant at reinvention. She was the queen of reinvention. She would never let herself get stagnant or stale. If
Mhm.
Joan was alive today, her TikTok would have 5 million followers.
I
Fucking
believe
brilliant.
it. I
Yeah,
remember she had and it was in the early stages of going to, her who gets all that regular work on these big
right,
networks at the time, but it was the early stages of like a YouTube channel. It was a little bit more
right.
funny at the time. She had this series towards the end called In Bed with Joan. The
Loved it.
hysterical goofiness, again, it's just continuing to do something different.
Right.
In terms of comedy and the way she appreciated comedy, so wonderful. Do you think at all, because there was a little bit of a comparison, do you think the TV show on HBO Max called Hacks has a little bit of that Joan Rivers ness about it, in terms of Gene Smart is the lead on that? Do you feel like there's a similarity of that story that they show on the TV show?
Yes and no. I feel like Joan in some ways was a little bit more humble, if you will, like where Gene Hacks, where her character is very, and on Hacks, Gene Smart
Gene Smart,
is,
yeah.
yeah, she's, I, I wouldn't even know who to sort of emulate, who to make the analogy of who her character could be. I
Hmm.
could say very loosely it would be Joan, but
Hmm.
Joan, like Andrew Krasny, who's my good friend who wrote for Joan for years, who was great friends with Joan and Melissa. I mean, I just knew so much about Joan, and Joan was very relatable and down to earth. I think Joan was just I think Joan was before her time in so many ways.
Hmm.
Even getting, Johnny's spot and like, Edgar, her husband, blowing it and her having
Hmm.
to reinvent
That's
after she was blackballed,
yeah.
basically. And as a woman, come on,
Hmm.
and not like
And what year is that? That is like that's still late. What
no,
is that? Early 70s?
that was 80s,
Oh,
early
that was
80s.
already that was already the 80s. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I just think she was brilliant at reinvention, she was brilliant at reading the room, she was just so fucking funny,
Mm,
and like I said, if Joan was alive today, I think it would just really upset her with how, like, "Oh, we
mhm.
can't say that. Oh, you can't." She would be like, "What the fuck?" That's what
Yeah,
comics do. We
yeah.
get up there and we offend. Not everybody's gonna love us, but they're gonna laugh, hate us, throw shit at us, but it's okay
Well,
because
and
we're
that joke now jokes aren't like formulated jokes. They're
no,
like, and they said this on Hack, so this is why I kind of maybe
right.
thought of that. It's just an interesting thought bubble. It's like an odd, unique thing. That's not a joke. That's not comedy. And I think that's what I really love about the old school. What a crushing time for her though, that she rocked out with Johnny Carson in such a way, was the lead fill-in, and then when things didn't go away, I think she went to Fox, correct?
Fox gave her her own late night show.
And that is, to our knowledge, that relationship was completely severed, right? Johnny did
Severed.
not take to that.
No,
What is
severed.
that about? How does she? Maybe this is why she's so scrappy, actually. you know?
Well, I mean, you know, and I know this story, but I can't remember every detail, so I don't want to give it justice. But then when she went to Fox, okay,
Mhm.
her husband, who Edgar, who later committed
Yeah.
suicide because I think he blamed himself. Like he was producing, which once again, not probably a good combo. Like meaning
Mhm.
you're married, like there has to be some separation because you know, sometimes you need an executive producer or a head writer to be like, that's bullshit. We're not doing it. It sucks. Trust me, you'll thank me tomorrow. And
Mhm.
I think when you're married or so close to someone, you might not be able to navigate that fine line, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so when the Fox show got canceled, you know, and I think Edgar took it very personally,
Mhm.
and you know, he took his life. But once again, look at her reinvention after Edgar like meaning no one wanted to touch her with a 10-foot pole. Her
Yeah.
husband committed suicide. She, you know, fucked over Johnny Carson, and her Fox show was canceled. She was
Mhm.
poisoned, but she persevered. She reinvented, and like you know, they just had a big uh and I think it wasn't a roast, but they just had a big tribute to Joan in New York at the Apollo Theater to so many comics because once again I think they realize how those women paved the way. And Joan wasn't like, you know, drop dead gorgeous. She was, you know, I mean, that was part of her shtick and her humor, but
Mhm.
um, just brilliant on every level. She was, you know, smart with money. She was brilliant on every level. You know, and very sadly missed. But on the
Mhm.
other note, I don't think she could. I think she would hate where we are today. But
Yeah.
I would love to see her interview show, you know, in the bed with Joan. It would be brilliant in this day and
Yeah.
age.
Oh,
Brilliant.
yeah, yeah. It would
Yeah,
definitely be received well.
right.
One last thing about Joan Rivers before we move on to Real Housewives and
Okay.
Bravo banter, which, by the way, I think I could see you on Bravo, so we'll talk about that too, in my opinion. And I don't want to waste all your time, but let's talk. This is my last thing about Joan Rivers, and it's not really Joan itself. It's about honing the craft. It is about the follow through. So, and it's so funny because if I mention this, Marky, it's as if it's like, oh, you're not adapting and you're not like in the quick social media landscape. While I respect and understand that, let me just go back for a second. What I loved about Joan Rivers, and of course we saw Gene Smart's character in Hacks also do this, is the Rolodex, of taking notes and peeling back these interesting scenarios that we go through. I think it's interesting that because we now could be a viral success if we eat a Tide Pod,
Right. Which I
that
hate.
we have lost the art of honing the craft of what it is that you do. And I
Right.
used to think that too within myself when I was coming up in radio. I remember there was those different stages. There was the stage where I was overly prepared because I was really green. I was brand new. I was 21 years old, driving to Bakersfield in the middle of the night, which was no fun. Bakersfield, what a city, right? And I'm doing my radio show. And at that time I was so prepared. But then I remember working my butt off to get to a point where I'm like, oh no, you've elevated, you've gotten a little bit better, thankfully. And you could more, I don't want to say wing it, but you can be more like off the cuff. And I remember thinking that was follow me here. I remember thinking that was the note of like success. Like I can just like jump in. I have a natural talent. And while that's good, I still think, if I get an opportunity to interview you, I did a ton of research, even though I know you. If I get the opportunity to interview anybody that is of interest to me, I just think we're losing that sense of doing the work. Do you follow kind of what I'm saying?
There's one thing that I disagree with when you said when you interview someone that
Mhm.
interests you and your audience. Like,
Okay.
is your audience going to give a shit about Joan Rivers? I don't know because you know it's your audience. Or does your audience care more about the Real Housewives? I
Yeah.
don't know. Meaning that's something like, you know what I mean?
You said so, like add that into the thought process. Like it can't just
Right.
be what you
It can't be about
consume.
you. It can't be
Yeah.
about you. It's
Yeah.
gotta be about your audience is the star and you're the co-star.
Yeah.
That's the key to success. But,
Yeah.
you know, and there was another point I wanted to make, which I hate about this aspect of the business. If I see one more people eating in their car, can someone explain to me that? Like, "Hey, I'm trying the crumble cookies," and they're, like, taking a bite, and I'm seeing and they always cover their mouth when they're chewing. It's like,
Mhm.
"Why do we have to see you eat it?"
Well, and maybe that's what I'm talking about. Like, I understand that's maybe more fun. Maybe it feels more natural. Maybe that's why people or audiences are taking to that. And while that's, again, that's what's for the now. I'm just saying the type of person I am when I want to consume something, I like to know that the person worked their butt off to give what it is that they gave. You know,
Right.
just the same way as when you go into a doctor, when you go get you want the most wonderful restaurant, you want to make sure that there's like the follow through. And so, yeah, it's a little hard to kind of like give that comparison, but I've learned that over the times going forward, I really respect anybody who hones their craft, because it's sort of becoming a little bit of a lost art form, you know, like, and that's the thing too. Why don't you want to know everything? If it's
Right.
something that you're doing, you should want to know everything. You know, I'm
You wanna know
gaining.
why?
Why?
This generation thinks they know everything. They have Google, they have
Well, Marky.
ChatGPT. They think they know everything. And I'm not saying your generation, I'm saying the generation below
Yeah,
you. They
yeah,
think
yeah.
they know everything. They don't need any kind of coaching. You know, it's interesting. Like I coach some big name people that make millions of dollars that are very successful, but they
Mhm.
get the power of coaching. Where
Yeah.
these young kids think I know everything and they don't get the power of it.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. And remember, I
Right.
gave you that example with radio. It's like when I first started overly prepared, when I got good,
Right.
I was like, I could just wing it. You know, that was like a beacon of like, oh, you're a little bit better, which is fine. But then I got
Right.
to that stage. I remember when I was working with Maria Menounos and Kevin Undergaro at After Buzz, it was
Right.
like she was that girl. She was as good as you're gonna get at that skill set, but the preparation was always so wonderful. And I remember just seeing that and I'm like, I need to do that too, because at the end of the day, you want to kind of be prepared and have different lanes to go down. That
Right.
you kind of want to, you know, it's like being an athlete. You want to make sure you can be the best basketball player in the world, but you're going to be shooting baskets, you know, all night, you know, if you can.
Right.
Okay, so we got to find out why Marky is not on Bravo, because I think you should come in and, first of all, Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. People say it's the crown jewel of the franchise. I couldn't disagree more.
Hey, Ronnie Jr.